You feel it the moment you step outside in the evening, and the air still hasn't let go of the day's heat. That's the detail, not the afternoon spike everyone keeps talking about. The night that never cools. I was scrolling the Copernicus seasonal data late one evening, half expecting the usual summer story, when the overnight minimum line stopped me cold. It barely moved. Europe's July outlook just shifted. And the thing the meteorologists quietly flagged this time is not how hot the days get. It's that the nights across southern Europe are being forecast to stay above 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, night after night after night. That is the exact pattern that killed tens of thousands of people in the summer of 2003. That reading comes straight from the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts. Stay with me, because by the end, I'm going to show you the one number in the Mediterranean Sea data that explains why this heat won't break and why it matters to you, even if you're sitting in America right now, thousands of miles from any of it. Let me back up and show you what actually shifted, because the headline version and the data version are two different stories. When the July update came out, almost every outlet ran the same picture. A big red blob over Spain, France, and Italy. The words heat dome stamped across it. Forecast daytime highs climbing toward 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and in a few spots pushing toward 44, which is around 111. That's a real and serious number. Spain and Portugal already touched 46 degrees Celsius in late June, about 115 Fahrenheit. And the images of people crowding around public fountains went everywhere. So the story wrote itself. Hot days, record afternoons. Drink water, stay inside, it'll pass. But here's the first thing that didn't sit right with me. Europe has had hot afternoons before, plenty of them. A single scorching day, even a very extreme one, is survivable for most healthy people. Your body takes the hit during the day, and then the sun goes down, the air cools, and you recover overnight. That recovery window is what keeps a heat wave from becoming a mass casualty event. It is the release valve. And when I looked at the ensemble forecast for this July, the release valve was the thing that was missing. The models weren't just showing hot days. They were showing that the temperature at 3 and 4 in the morning, the coldest part of the night, was refusing to fall back down. Therefore, the question I could not let go of was simple. If the afternoon highs this July are roughly in the same range as heat waves Europe has already survived, why did this specific forecast make the meteorologists at the European agencies change their language? What did they see in the overnight numbers that made this one different? To answer that, I had to go back to the worst case anyone in Europe still remembers and pull the actual data from it, not the memory of it. The summer of 2003, most people who lived through it describe it as the hot one. What the records actually show is far darker. Across Europe that summer, the excess death toll came in above 70,000 people. Let me say that again, because that figure gets softened every time it's repeated. More than 70,000 people died who would not otherwise have died in a matter of weeks. France alone lost roughly 15,000 in a single stretch of August. And when researchers went back through the mortality curves afterward, they found something that changed how climate scientists think about heat entirely. The deaths did not track the daytime highs. They tracked the nighttime lows. In Paris during that August, the overnight temperature in parts of the city stayed near 25 degrees Celsius, which is 77 degrees Fahrenheit, for night after night. The human body needs the night to cool down. Your core temperature is supposed to drop while you sleep. Your heart gets a break from working overtime to shed heat. When the air around you never falls below the mid-20s Celsius, that break never comes. The strain just accumulates, hour after hour, night after night, until the most vulnerable hearts and kidneys simply give out. That's what a tropical night does. It's defined as any night where the temperature never drops below 20 degrees Celsius, 68 Fahrenheit. And in 2003, it was the run of consecutive tropical nights, not the single hottest afternoon, that lined up almost perfectly with the death curve. So when I saw this July's forecast showing a stacked run of those exact nights, I stopped thinking of it as a hot spell. I started reading it as the same fingerprint. But one bad memory from 2003 is not proof of anything about this year. I needed something more recent, and I needed it to be measured, not remembered. So I went to the 2022 data, and that's where the case really started to tighten. The summer of 2022 is the one a lot of people have already forgotten, because it didn't get the same lasting label as 2003. But a study published afterward in the journal Nature Medicine, led by researchers at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, went back and counted. Their estimate for heat-related deaths across Europe that summer came in above 61,000 people. 61,000. Almost as many as the catastrophe that traumatized the whole continent 2 decades earlier. And it happened recently, quietly, and largely without the same alarm. Italy, Spain, and Germany carried the heaviest burden, and once again, when scientists broke the numbers down, the strongest single predictor of who died was not the peak afternoon reading in any one city. It was the persistence, the number of days, and, critically, nights the heat refused to let go. Here's the part that made me sit up. That same research group and others have pointed out that our warning systems and our news coverage are still built almost entirely around daytime maximum temperatures. We put the big red number on the screen, 42 degrees, 108 Fahrenheit, and people brace for the afternoon. But the afternoon is not what fills the hospitals 3 days later. The relentless, uncooling night is the least photogenic part of a heat wave and the most lethal, and it barely makes the broadcast. Therefore, the anomaly I'd spotted wasn't a fluke of one model run. It was the single most dangerous variable in heat science, and this July's forecast was lighting it up, which left me with a much bigger question. Something has to be holding all that heat in overnight. Air doesn't just refuse to cool for no reason. So what, physically, is keeping the European night warm this time, and is it something temporary or something that's going to sit there and refuse to move? That question is what dragged me out of the atmosphere and down to the water. And that's where I found the number this whole video is really about, the Mediterranean Sea. We tend to think of it as a postcard, warm, blue, gentle. But a sea is also a giant battery for heat. Water holds warmth far longer than air does, and it releases that warmth slowly, especially at night. During the day, the land heats up and the sea heats up. At night, the land cools quickly, but a warm sea just keeps breathing heat and moisture back into the air above it and along the coast. So the temperature of the Mediterranean in the summer isn't a side detail. It is one of the main dials controlling how warm the nights get for tens of millions of people living around its rim. And when I pulled the sea surface temperature data from the Copernicus Marine Service, the number I was looking at was not normal. Through late June, large stretches of the Western Mediterranean, especially around the Balearic Islands off Spain, were running 4 to 6 degrees Celsius above the seasonal average. That's roughly 7 to 11 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than that patch of sea is supposed to be at that time of year. Surface readings in places were pushing toward 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 Fahrenheit, in water that would normally sit in the low 20s. Scientists have a name for this: a marine heat wave. The sea itself is running a fever. Now stack the two things on top of each other. You have an atmospheric heat dome parked overhead, pumping hot air down and holding the sky clear so the sun cooks the surface all day. And underneath it, you have a sea that is already several degrees too warm, acting like a radiator that never gets switched off after dark. The land tries to cool at night, the sea won't let it. It keeps feeding warm, humid air onshore hour after hour. That is the physical machine behind a stalled string of tropical nights. That's why the overnight minimum line on my screen wouldn't come down. It isn't a glitch. It's a feedback loop, and the sea is holding the door open. And now that you understand the physical machine driving these dangerous nights, I want to step outside the forecast for just a moment. If this way of reading weather, going past the headline number and into the data that actually predicts outcomes, is something you want to develop further, I've put that entire framework into a series of books: Storm Ready, Storm Signal, and Storm Protocol. Each one is built around the same approach you're seeing here: finding the quiet variable that the loud coverage skips, and understanding what it means before it becomes an emergency. You can find the details in the description below. With that context in mind, let's get back to the Mediterranean, because the marine heat wave is where the reported story ends and where the part nobody put on the screen begins. But before I show you how bad that loop can get, I need to stop and talk to the person watching this who's already thinking, this is a Europe problem. I live in Ohio or Arizona or Georgia. Why should I care? Because the next part is specifically for you, and it might be the most useful 90 seconds in this whole video. Here's the thing I need you to understand. The mechanism I just described, a warm body of water refusing to let the night cool down, is not European. It is not exotic. It is the exact same physics playing out along the American Gulf Coast and the southeastern Atlantic seaboard right now. The Gulf of Mexico has been running record and near record surface temperatures for consecutive summers. And the same research that tracks heat deaths in Europe finds the same brutal pattern in United States mortality data. The killer is the warm night, not just the hot day. So even if you never set foot near the Mediterranean, the lesson from this forecast lands directly in your backyard. So here is the one concrete thing you can do today, wherever you live: inland or coastal, high ground or low. Stop reading only the daytime high in your forecast. Scroll down and find the overnight low. That's the number that's usually smaller and grayer and easy to skip. Track it for the next week. If you start seeing overnight lows that don't drop below 75 degrees Fahrenheit, about 24 Celsius, for 3 or more nights in a row, your area is entering the danger zone that actually fills emergency rooms, regardless of how the afternoon feels. Check on anyone you know who is over 65 or lives alone or doesn't have working air conditioning on the second and third night of a warm stretch, not the first. The first night, people cope. It's the accumulation that breaks them. And if you have elderly parents or relatives anywhere in Southern Europe, or you're one of the millions of Americans who booked a July trip to Spain, Italy, or Greece, understand that the risk in your plans is not the sunny afternoon. It's the hotel room that never cools down at 4 in the morning. Ask whether the place you're staying has real air conditioning that runs all night, not just a fan. That single question is the most protective thing on your whole itinerary. Now, with that in your pocket, let me take you back to the Mediterranean, because the marine heat wave is where the reported story ends and where the part nobody put on the screen begins. The mainstream coverage, when it mentioned the warm sea at all, framed it as a nice-to-know footnote: warmer water, better swimming, maybe a few more thunderstorms later in the season. What the reported version left out is what that warm water does to the floor under the nighttime temperature. And here's where I have to be honest with you about why this gets buried. It isn't a conspiracy. It's simpler and, in a way, more frustrating than that. A daytime record high is a clean, dramatic, shareable number. 46 degrees. Hottest day ever recorded in this town. It fits in a headline and it makes a striking thumbnail. A sea surface temperature anomaly feeding a persistent nocturnal minimum through latent heat release does not fit in a headline. It doesn't photograph. So the number that actually predicts the body count gets left on the cutting room floor every single time in favor of the number that looks good on screen. The coverage isn't lying to you. It's just showing you the loud part and skipping the quiet part that does the real damage. And the quiet part is this: When I went into the seasonal outlook from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts and looked past the temperature maps, everyone's screenshots, I found the probability charts underneath. Not the average temperature, the odds that the season lands in the hottest third of everything on record. And for Southern Europe and the Mediterranean basin this July, those odds weren't leaning warm. They were stacked heavily toward the upper extreme, with the warm signal reinforced precisely over the regions where the sea is running that fever. The atmosphere and the ocean were pointing the same direction at the same time. In forecasting, when two independent systems agree like that, you stop treating it as a possibility and start treating it as the base case. So let me put the whole picture together the way it finally assembled for me, because this is the finale, and it's the thing I could not find stated plainly anywhere in the coverage. Everyone reported the heat dome. That's real. Everyone reported the record afternoon highs. Those are real too. But the daytime high is the decoy. It's the number that grabs your attention while the actual threat builds in the dark. The real story is a coupled system. Up top, a blocking high-pressure ridge meteorologists call the stubborn version of it an omega block, because on the map it looks like the Greek letter omega parks over the continent and refuses to move for days or weeks because the jet stream that would normally shove it along has gone slack and wavy. That ridge holds the skies clear and lets the heat build with nothing to break it. And underneath, the Mediterranean, 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, too warm, acts as a heat reservoir that exhales warmth and moisture into the coastal air all night long. The land can't shed its heat because the sea keeps replacing it. The result is not one terrible afternoon. It's a chain of tropical nights, each one adding strain the human body was supposed to recover from and can't. And here is the specific, verifiable finale. The thing you can go check yourself. Pull up the Copernicus Marine Service sea surface temperature anomaly map for the Western Mediterranean and pull up the European Center's seasonal minimum temperature outlook next to it. Look at where the warmest water sits and where the warm night signal is strongest. They overlap. That overlap, not the red blob on the daytime map, is the map of where the danger actually lives this July. Copernicus itself, through the World Meteorological Organization, has already put the underlying fact on the record that most people scrolled right past. Europe is the fastest warming continent on Earth, heating at roughly twice the global average rate. So this is not a freak year that will snap back to normal. The warm sea and the uncooling night are becoming the new normal floor. And this July is one of the clearest early readings of it we've had. The signal was there the whole time. It was sitting in the overnight minimum line and the sea surface anomaly map in datasets that update every single day, free and public. It got overlooked because it doesn't shout. The people who read the data correctly, the scientists who counted the 70,000 in 2003 and the 61,000 in 2022, already know the night is what kills. And now you know it too, with time to do something about it, which is more than most people watching the loud version of this story will get. That's the piece the wider coverage skipped. Not that Europe is hot. Everyone knows Europe is hot. It's that the specific, measurable reason this July is dangerous is written in the temperature of the sea and the temperature of the night. And both of those numbers are being quietly ignored in favor of the one that looks better on camera. So let me leave you with what this really comes down to, because it isn't a number. It's a feeling. It's the difference between watching a hot afternoon and thinking it'll pass, and understanding that the danger comes at 3 in the morning when the air still hasn't cooled and the most fragile people around you are quietly running out of margin. You can't see that on a thumbnail, but you can see it in the data, and now you know exactly where to look. You're the kind of person who wanted the real reading behind the headline instead of the softened, screenshot-ready version. That's why you made it all the way here, while most people bounced after the big red map. So do one thing for me. Go find the overnight low in your own forecast right now, wherever you are, and tell me in the comments what it says and what region you're watching from. I read them, and I want to see how many of you are already sitting in a run of warm nights without having noticed. And tell me this specifically. Did your local coverage mention the nighttime lows at all, or did they only give you the daytime high? I'm genuinely curious how widespread the blind spot is. If you want to see these patterns while they're still just lines on a chart, before they become the headline, everyone panics about 3 days too late, subscribe and stay with me, because the next thing I'm tracking is that slack, wavy jet stream. I mentioned the one letting these blocking ridges sit still for weeks. There's a reading in the North Atlantic that suggests these blocks are going to lock in place longer this summer than they used to. And when I've finished pulling that data apart, you're going to want to see what it means for August. I'll show you the number the moment I'm sure of it. Watch the nights. That's where this one hides. I'll bet you're wondering about that survival plan. Stay with me. Inside the Weather Watch, I pick up right where this video stops and walk you through Southern Europe's night heat survival plan, region by region. And you can ask me your own question. A real person, me, answers you, not a machine. You'd belong with weather watchers just like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime, one click.